That's Marco D'Amico. You can follow him at MN D'Amico on X, the senior editor for RG Media and reporter for Montreal Hockey Now. And of course, you listen to him as a contributor on TSN 690 as the Montreal Canadiens are now into the second half of their season and still very much in the mix. And, you know, when we talk about potential moves for the Montreal Canadiens, adding pieces here or there, let's get to the story from rg.org where you can read it. And I will post it and pin it to the comment section right here. When we talk about what you guys broke in the reporting regarding Kyle Dubas's Pittsburgh Penguins, you guys got a nice shout out from the biggest, most popular hockey podcast on planet Earth and Spit and Chicklets. So you know there's something there with the Pittsburgh Penguins, and you're reporting that a fire sale is imminent for the Penguins with big veterans on the block. So let's expand to this. How aggressive you're reporting when it comes to Kyle Dubas? How long has he been working on this? When did they decide that, okay, listen, fire sale is imminent, let's start moving pieces?
I'd say it's been something that's kind of been in progress, kind of teetering. You know, like they wanted a little bit more fiscal flexibility as early as last summer. Yeah. For example, Kyle Dubas initially did not want to bring back Tristan Jarry. That was actually a call that was made by the coaching staff that tried to convince him to bring him back. And now we see the situation they're in. They're looking for fiscal flexibility because, especially now with the cap rising, and you can see how the two things coincide. But with escrow being canceled, the cap going up by $10 million, if they're able to rid themselves of salary, they don't really need to do anything on the open market to make themselves more attractive. You get to play with Sidney Crosby and Geno Malkin, right? Like you get to be part of the last push for these stars. There's no better motivation, in my honest opinion. If you are of the 27 to 30-year-old, like these are the guys that you watched break the NHL in 05, 06, and then just kind of continue on from there. So they're seeing it that way. So they would like to move out some contracts. At the same time, they also want to move out some veterans and make room for a little bit more of a fresher take. So you're looking at guys that are available, like an Erik Karlsson, even if he has a no movement clause. He's waived it once. He'll waive it again if it means he can go to a contending club. And the Penguins, from our reports, from the sources that we have within or around the Pittsburgh Penguins, the idea is that they are willing to use their last retaining slot on him so that they can allow a deal to happen.
You know, you alluded to, Tristan Jarry, right? Kyle Dubas puts him on waivers, and I get it. Allowing a goal on the first shot he's faced 6 times, not good for job security. But let's expand on your reporting. RG.org, are the Pittsburgh Penguins about to have a fire sale with Marco D'Amico? This after they waived Tristan Jarry and his 5.38 AAV. And now as you expand and you talk about the source close to this situation confirming that Sidney Crosby's not on the block, that Evgeny Malkin is not on the block, Brian Rust, Philip Tomasino, Owen Pickering. Those are the guys right now that your sources are telling you and you guys are reporting are not on the block. And there was part of me, listen, when Crosby was drafted, I'll always remember him sitting down with TSN's Gordon Miller talking about how the Canadiens were his boyhood team. And I always believe generational players, regardless of the sport, kind of get what they want when they want it. So I thought to myself, if Sidney Crosby at any point in his playing career said, I want to be a Canadian, he will be a Canadian. But
let him right in.
Please. No cover charge, 87. We got it. No problem. So let's talk about the strategy, your belief, why this is the right move for the Penguins to keep Sidney Crosby a Penguin for life. And Crosby not one of those guys. If the Penguins are having this fire sale, as you guys are reporting, that Crosby's going to stay a Penguin for life. What do you make of that decision?
I can't confirm that he'll stay a Penguin for life.
Yeah, yes, right. But on the surface right now.
But right now, like, this is what I tell fans, basically, that retort, like, what are they doing? Why isn't Pittsburgh burning it all to the ground? Call me again in the summer and we'll have a different conversation because things may be different, right? Like, they're still kind of in the playoff race. They just won yesterday. But the belief is that, exactly. But the belief is that they're eventually going to lose steam because already being 4 or 5 points out of a playoff spot, now when they have, if I'm not mistaken, one of the more difficult schedules, I'd have to go and double check, for the rest of the season. But the issue is like most of their core is on the older side, and those tend to run out of steam as you get further into the season. So there's that little bit of worry. The other worry is, okay, they could maybe potentially scratch and claw their way into it, but then by next year they'll have absolutely nothing to work with. And so that, I think they want to get ahead of that. So when you look at a guy like Sidney Crosby, full no movement clause, for this year and next year, doesn't want to go anywhere, is committed to the Penguins. I don't see that changing until the Penguins officially turn around and say, we're going to burn it all down. And right now, ownership doesn't want to know anything about that. Kyle Dubas was brought in to keep this team afloat, and to ensure the transition of the old guard to a newer identity, to retool. Not unlike what Marc Bergevin was tasked for with the Montreal Canadiens, although the core was much less old when he took over.
Not as good.
Not as good. And to Kyle Dubas's discredit, bringing in Erik Karlsson for the price that he did, everyone thought was really good, hasn't really worked out, right? So these are kind of the situations that they're dealing with. So when I think fire sale, you're looking at a guy like Rickard Rakell, who's on pace for like 40 goals this season at $5 million a year. Yes, he's 31 years old, but at $5 million a year, and we just talked about the cap going up by $10 million. A $5 million player is basically a high-end third liner at this point, and he's putting up top, first line numbers. Albeit, yes, playing with Brian Rust and Sidney Crosby, but again, if you're a contending club, you tend to have point per game players that you could put him around as a complementary piece. So there's a reason why he's risen in the discussions. You look at Marcus Pettersson, pending free agent, sure, but we didn't get a firm no that Chris Letang was not being discussed. And so,
that's the next one.
Because when you're starting to have those conversations, and again, I don't want to start the rumor that Chris Letang is available and everyone, all we were told was there hasn't been a firm no told to general managers who bring up his name, as you would with the other five that we mentioned. And some people may be confused. Why Tomasino and Pickering? Well, it's because they're not exactly the Pittsburgh Penguins want to keep their good young players. They see some really high potential with Tomasino. And for those that don't watch Pittsburgh Penguin games, Owen Pickering is probably one of their smoothest, safest defensemen on the ice at the tender age of 2021. So they're really fond of him. And once Pettersson leaves, he's probably going to come in and take that spot. I believe he's injured at the moment. So they like some of their young guys. They don't have that many. They want to keep them. But clearly their idea is to move as much salary as possible, get draft picks and futures, clear cap space, and then potentially hit a jackpot this summer.
And just to, again, reiterate with the Marco D'Amico, as you can follow him on X at MN D'Amico, senior editor at RG Media and reporter for Montreal Hockey Now, that RG Media is not reporting Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang are on the block. Quite the contrary at this point, just the reporting that a fire sale seems imminent in Pittsburgh as we look at the NHL standings. And the Penguins coming off a big 5-1 win against LA. Their goal differential is terrible. It's the worst in the conference, 48 points. They're 3 points from joining the Islanders at the bottom of the Metro Division. So as close as some teams are, really, when we start talking 3, 4, 5 points, maybe the time is now, which leads me to the Canadiens. Let me wrap up this bit on the Penguins, tie it into the Canadiens. Here they are in year 3 of this rebuild. Are the Canadiens even in the business this year, in the business at sniffing around at guys like Erik Karlsson or other, great veterans that could help bolster the Montreal Canadiens, knowing what we know about Ken Hughes? There's part of me, Marco, that wants to see this team ride with the guys they've been with all season. I like that idea in my head. But if you're in the mix or maybe having a playoff spot, maybe you go out there and you splash the pot a little bit. So are the Canadiens in the business at looking at really great veterans to help their chances here?
One of the things that I always say when it comes to a club in the Montreal Canadiens shoes, and we saw it a little bit last year with the Nashville Predators. I wouldn't say miraculously, they played really well, but against expectations, made the playoffs. And they had guys like Carrier and Novak, for example, that were pending free agents that they decided to refuse some pretty substantial offers for, and instead re-sign them. And then they took that as we made the playoffs, now let's just go and spend. And they spent all this money on players, and the chemistry is just completely off, and the whole team structure is just completely off. So there's always a trap that, and like I don't pretend to be smarter than your average NHL general manager, but it's just from an observational perspective. You don't want to kill what's in front of you, and you need to be extremely selective with who you bring in. And I feel like the trade deadline is the absolute worst time, especially right now with so few identifiable buyers, that the pickings are so slim. Prices are high and consequences already from what we're being told. And teams are antsy because of the Four Nations tournament, basically like cutting in 2 weeks of the season. And then basically you're 10 days away from the trade deadline as soon as you start up again. So it's creating a lot of chaos. I don't think that now is the time. I say ride the kids. My honest opinion, ride the kids. See what you can get for some of the, less important pending free agents. I don't think necessarily the Canadiens should trade Jake Evans unless his salary demands are astronomical. But should they be adding to this roster? The argument could be made that the Canadiens can do without, a third or fourth round pick. They have enough. Yes. And if it allows them to just bring in a small boost on defense or whatever, I could see why people would be okay with that. Personally, I feel like the Canadiens are going to need all the assets in the world this summer if they're going to want to make trades, because players that are currently under contract, their value just went up a little bit, because players that are going to be signing this summer are going to be signing for numbers that are going to make people pull their hair out, or if they had any, pull it out.
It's okay.
So it's going to be a situation where cost controlled is going to be the new term for cost controlled isn't going to be young players on cheap contracts. It's going to be players in their prime that signed while the cap was flat. That's what cost control is going to go towards. And I feel like when you're looking at a team like the Montreal Canadiens, they are better. I think they would learn more about their team if they just let that team ride. See who rises to the occasion, see who does not. And then with that information, you go and fill out your roster. So the Canadiens, do they need to go and get a second line center, or will Kirby Dach continue on his current path? That's what you need to see. You shouldn't go out and get another center to help him. Let's see if he can figure it out. The same thing applies on defense, right? The Canadiens absolutely need another top four, if not top pair, right shot defenseman. And with David Reinbacher being out for most of this season, he should be coming back in the next 4 to 6 weeks. It creates a situation where you're going to have to buy yourself some time. So that's another aspect. And those are two very, very difficult positions to fill. So this is the part where I get, I'm happy for Canadiens fans, because the Canadiens are exactly where they want it to be in the mix. The games are exciting. As we saw over the weekend, there's a lot of energy. I think the key here is not losing sight of the long-term plan. And when you got guys like Demidov coming in, Michael Hage probably the year after, there's a lot of cheap talent that they can bring in. So the key is going to be finding the right pieces. So you look at an Erik Karlsson on the turn, you're talking about right shot defenseman. I don't think that would necessarily be a fit for the Canadiens, just because I don't think he has that kind of personality or a culture that the Canadiens are trying to build. And they're really hard on that culture. And I think a lot of that team first culture not only fits into their identity, but it also fits into the type of players they are when it comes to contract negotiations. And we've seen it. You saw it with Juraj Slafkovsky, opting to sign early, Cole Caulfield opting to sign early, Caden Gooley opting to sign early. They're trying to get those guys to follow suit and to follow a trend, not necessarily a fiscal structure, because that's always going to change, but at least follow a trend. Like when the Canadiens have to discuss with Patrick Laine either this summer or the next, I'm not expecting him to ask for the moon because of that culture.
Correct. And we'll find out whether talk is cheap, because, he's saying nothing but great things. Like, it feels like Montreal has rejuvenated his passion. He seems like just a happier guy, and that is the most important thing, obviously. Marco D'Amico, follow him on X, MN D'Amico. It's got an apostrophe in his family name, so make sure you put the punctuation in there, and a proud member of the Bald Brotherhood, of which I'm thinning on top. I try to cover it up the best I can. I'm trying to hang on, brother. I'm trying to hang on. Marco, great stuff as always. Keep up the outstanding work, and looking forward to catching up again soon, as the Montreal Canadiens are very much in the mix. And I like what you're saying about putting pressure. And the way you do that is, let's see Kirby Dach. Let's see him play some meaningful games in March. Let's see what it's like under the gun as opposed to a little garbage time, no garbage time, but you know what I mean. Games that don't have as much meaning as someone that's trying to catch that 8th and final playoff spot. Marco, good stuff as always. Thank you, brother.
Always a pleasure, man. Talk soon.